Thaddeus Sterling had a special talent for appraising objects, but he was blind to the value of people. He looked at the cotton dress Aurelia had sewn with trembling fingers and decided it wasn't worth the price of admission to the Rothschild Gala. He believed he was protecting his reputation by hiding his poor wife in the penthouse. He didn't know that poverty is just a temporary disguise for true royalty. As he adjusted his platinum cufflinks, Thaddeus thought he was the predator in the room. He was completely unaware that by humiliating Aurelia tonight, he wasn't breaking a weak woman, but waking the wrath of an ancient bloodline that would soon turn his fortune to dust and his prejudices into his own grave. Behind her, Thaddeus laughed. The sound cut through the storm's white noise, sharp as broken crystal. "You actually thought I'd take you?" His voice dripped with the kind of contempt that came easy to men who'd never known what. "To the Rothschild Gala? Looking like that?" Aurelia's reflection stared back at her in the rain-streaked glass. A ghost in a cotton dress she'd sewn herself. Her dark hair pulled back in a simple twist because she'd sold her last good clip 3 months ago to pay the housekeeper. The woman in the window looked small, faded, like something left too long in harsh light. She turned slowly, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. Thaddeus stood by the bar, all sharp angles in his custom Tom Ford suit, his phone casting a blue glow across his angular face. He didn't even look up as he poured himself scotch, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I thought." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. She hated how it sounded. Apologetic. "You said this morning we'd go together." That was before I remembered what an embarrassment you are. He finally met her eyes, his gaze sliding over her like she was something distasteful he'd found on his shoe. "Mitchell asked me last week if you were my charity case." "My charity case, Aurelia. Do you have any idea how that made me look?" The scotch in his glass caught the light from the chandelier. Amber and gold, expensive and warm. Everything in this apartment was expensive. Everything except her. "I could wear the blue dress," she offered, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew. The blue dress was gone. She'd checked the closet that afternoon and found empty hangers where it should have been. Thaddeus's laugh was uglier this time. "I sold it. Got $800 for it. More than you're worth, honestly. Vintage door shouldn't be wasted on someone who doesn't know the difference between Cartier and costume jewelry." The room tilted slightly. Aurelia gripped the back of the nearest chair, her knuckles going white. The blue dress had been her mother's. The only thing she'd kept when Alara died, when the cancer had finally won and left Aurelia alone at 19 with nothing but medical debt and memories. "That was my mother's." The words scraped out her throat. "And now it's $800 in my account." Thaddeus drained his glass, set it down with a decisive click. "Consider it payment for 3 years of room and board. God knows you've never contributed anything else." The rain hammered harder against the windows. Aurelia felt something shift inside her chest, a sensation like ice cracking, like something long dormant beginning to stir. Her vision blurred at the edges, and for a moment the chandelier seemed too bright, each crystal prism splitting light into painful shards that drove into her skull. "I should go," she whispered. "Yes, you should." Thaddeus was already texting someone, his thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. "Actually, perfect timing. I'm announcing the divorce at the gala tonight. Mitchell's wife knows a photographer from Vanity Fair. We'll frame it as me finally breaking free from a gold digger who trapped me with a fake pregnancy." The words hit like a physical blow. Aurelia's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, still flat, still unchanged, though she'd been feeling strange for weeks now. The nausea that came and went. The way her skin had started to feel too tight, like she was outgrowing herself from the inside. The dreams that left her gasping awake, her sheets soaked with sweat, images of crimson and shadow burned into her retinas. "I was never pregnant," she said quietly. "I never said I was." "Details." He waved his hand dismissively. "The narrative is what matters." Poor Thaddeus Galt, taken advantage of by some nobody from nowhere. Very sympathetic, very clean. He finally looked up from his phone, and something in his expression made her stomach clench. This wasn't just cruelty. This was calculated destruction. "My lawyer will be in touch. You'll sign the papers, take nothing, and disappear. If you try to fight it, I'll bury you so deep no one will ever find you. Are we clear?" Aurelia nodded. What else could she do? She had no money, no family, no friends. Thaddeus had made sure of that, slowly isolating her until she was completely dependent on him. The perfect victim, except, except for the dreams. Except for the way her reflection sometimes seemed wrong in mirrors, her eyes flashing colors they shouldn't. Except for the letter that had arrived last week, addressed in handwriting she didn't recognize, an invitation to the Rothschild Gala with her name, her full name, Aurelia Vane, written in ink that seemed to shimmer in certain lights. She'd hidden it from Thaddeus. Some instinct had told her to keep it secret. "I'll leave tonight," she heard herself say. Her voice sounded different, steadier. Thaddeus smirked, already dismissing her, already moving toward his bedroom to finish getting ready for the gala, where he'd publicly destroy what remained of her reputation. Aurelia walked to the guest room. Her room, for the past year, since Thaddeus had decided he couldn't stand the sight of her even in sleep. She pulled the invitation from between the pages of her mother's old journal, the only other thing Thaddeus hadn't found to sell. The paper felt warm in her hands. The address embossed at the bottom was for the Rothschild estate. But there was something else, a small note in the corner, written in that same shimmering ink. Asterisk, come as you are. You're expected. Asterisk. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Aurelia looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser. Her eyes looked darker than usual, almost black. And was that? She leaned closer. For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw her pupils flash crimson. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows as she slipped on her worn coat and walked out of the penthouse, leaving behind 3 years of humiliation and heading towards something she didn't understand but couldn't resist. Toward the gala, toward whatever was waiting for her there. The rain had stopped by the time Aurelia reached the Rothschild estate, but the streets still gleamed like black glass under the gas lamps. Her coat clung to her shoulders, damp and heavy, though she couldn't remember when it had gotten wet. The walk from the penthouse should have taken 40 minutes, but she'd arrived in what felt like 10, her feet moving with a certainty that bypassed conscious thought. The estate rose before her like something from a fever dream, all Gothic spires and wrought iron, windows blazing with golden light that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. Carriages lined the circular drive, each one more opulent than the last, depositing women in silk and men in tailored evening wear. Aurelia looked down at her worn coat, at the simple navy dress beneath it that she'd owned since before her marriage. The fabric had been mended twice at the hem. She should turn back. But her hand was already reaching for the invitation in her pocket, and the moment her fingers touched the paper, warmth spread through her palm like she'd pressed it against sun-heated stone. The sensation traveled up her arm, wrapped around her ribs, settled low in her belly. Not unpleasant, just present, insistent. A doorman in crimson livery appeared at her elbow. She hadn't heard him approach. "Miss Vane," he said, and his voice carried an accent she couldn't place. Something old, something that made the hair on the back of her neck rise. "You were expected." He didn't ask for her invitation, didn't even glance at her shabby coat. He simply gestured toward the entrance with a gloved hand, and Aurelia found herself moving forward, climbing marble steps that felt too smooth beneath her feet, as if they'd been worn down by centuries of footsteps rather than decades. The foyer stole her breath. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with constellations she didn't recognize. The floor was inlaid marble in patterns that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. And the people, God, the people, they moved through the space like exotic birds, all jewel tones and glittering accessories, their laughter high and bright and somehow wrong. Too sharp, too knowing. Aurelia pressed herself against a column, suddenly aware of every thread in her coat, every scuff on her shoes. A woman in emerald silk glided past, and Aurelia caught a whiff of her perfume. Roses and something underneath, something metallic that made her stomach clench. Champagne. A server appeared with a silver tray. The flutes sparkled under the chandelier light, the liquid inside pale gold and effervescent. Aurelia took one with trembling fingers, more to have something to hold than from any desire to drink. The glass was cold, so cold it almost burned. She lifted it to her lips anyway. The champagne tasted like starlight, if starlight could have a flavor. Crisp and bright and somehow ancient, with an aftertaste that lingered on her tongue like copper. She swallowed, and the warmth from the invitation intensified, spreading through her chest, making her pulse quicken. Well, well. The voice came from behind her, and Aurelia didn't need to turn around to know who it belonged to. Thaddeus. She could smell his cologne, that aggressive cedar scent he wore to cover the whiskey on his breath. She turned slowly, the champagne flute steady in her hand despite the tremor in her knees. He looked immaculate in his tuxedo, his dark hair slicked back, his smile sharp enough to cut. Beside him stood a woman Aurelia recognized from society pages. Margot something, an heiress with more money than sense and a penchant for married men. Her hand rested possessively on Thaddeus's arm. "I didn't think you'd actually come," Thaddeus said, his eyes traveling over Aurelia's coat with undisguised contempt. "Though, I suppose even you couldn't resist the spectacle. The Rothschilds throw quite the party." Aurelia said nothing. The champagne had done something to her tongue, made it feel thick, made words seem unnecessary. She simply looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel small. Thaddeus's smile faltered, just for a moment, but she saw it. "Darling," Margot purred, tugging at his arm. "Let's not waste time on my wife." Thaddeus interrupted, his voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "Oh, but Margot, where are my manners? You should meet Aurelia. She's the one I was telling you about. The charity case I married out of pity." The words should have stung. A week ago, they would have driven her to tears. But standing there in the Rothschild foyer, with champagne warming her blood and the invitation burning in her pocket, Aurelia felt something else entirely. Something that tasted like rage and power and dark, sweet vindication. She smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. She could feel it on her face, unfamiliar and sharp, and Thaddeus actually took a step back. "Excuse me," Aurelia said quietly. Her voice sounded different again, lower, richer, like velvet dragged across stone. "I believe I'm expected elsewhere." She turned before he could respond, moving deeper into the estate, following a pull she couldn't name. The crowd seemed to part for her now, faces turning to watch her pass. Some looked curious, others looked knowing. One elderly woman in black lace actually smiled and inclined her head, as if Aurelia were someone worthy of respect. The ballroom opened before her like a cathedral. It was massive, all soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked gardens shrouded in mist. An orchestra played in one corner, something classical and haunting that made her bones ache. Dancers swirled across the floor in perfect synchronization, their movements too fluid, too graceful. Aurelia's eyes struggled to focus on any single couple. They blurred together like watercolors. She stood at the edge of the room, clutching her empty champagne flute, and felt utterly, completely out of place. "You came." The voice rolled over her like thunder, deep and resonant and impossibly close. Aurelia spun, and the champagne flute slipped from her fingers. It should have shattered on the marble floor. Instead, a hand caught it, a hand with long fingers and skin so pale it seemed to glow in the ballroom light. Aurelia's gaze traveled up that hand, up an arm clad in black silk, past broad shoulders, until she was looking into a face that made her forget how to breathe. He was beautiful the way storms were beautiful. The way broken glass, catching moonlight, was beautiful. Dangerous and compelling and utterly inhuman despite the perfect symmetry of his features. His hair fell to his shoulders in waves of black silk. His cheekbones could have been carved from marble. And his eyes were amber. Pure, liquid amber that seemed to glow from within, like embers in a dying fire. "Aurelia Vane," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer and a promise and a threat all at once. "I've been waiting for you." She should speak, should say something. But her tongue had forgotten how to form words, and all she could do was stare at this man, this creature, who held her champagne flute like it was made of spun sugar. He smiled, and Aurelia saw teeth. Perfect, white teeth, with canines just slightly too long to be human. "I'm Cyprian," he said, setting the flute on a passing server's tray, without looking away from her face. "Cyprian Valerius. And you, my dear, are late." The orchestra's music swelled, and the lights flickered. Just once, but enough to cast the ballroom into momentary shadow. In that darkness, Cyprian's eyes blazed brighter, and Aurelia understood with sudden, crystalline clarity that she had walked into something far beyond a simple gala. She had walked into another world entirely. "I don't understand," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Cyprian extended his hand. His fingers were steady, elegant, tipped with nails that looked more like polished obsidian than keratin. "You will," he said. "Dance with me, and I'll explain everything." Aurelia looked at his offered hand, looked at the ballroom full of two beautiful people who moved like predators in evening wear, looked back at Cyprian's glowing eyes, and felt the invitation in her pocket pulse with heat. She took his hand. His skin was cool against hers, but the moment their palms touched, electricity shot up her arm. The ballroom tilted, or maybe she did, and then Cyprian was pulling her onto the dance floor, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers with a gentleness that contradicted the power she could feel thrumming beneath his skin. They moved, and Aurelia realized she knew the steps. Somehow, impossibly, her feet knew where to go, her body knew how to follow his lead. They swept across the marble in perfect synchronization, and the other dancers melted away, giving them space, giving them the center of the floor. "Your mother," Cyprian said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "was supposed to tell you. Before she died, she was supposed to prepare you." Aurelia's breath caught. "My mother? What does she have to do with?" "Everything." Cyprian spun her, and when she came back to him, his face was closer, his amber eyes boring into hers. "Your mother was one of us, Aurelia. Not human. Not entirely. And neither are you." The word should have sounded insane, should have sent her running. But they landed in her chest like truth, like something she'd always known but never had the words to name. "What am I?" she breathed. "You're mine," Cyprian said simply. "My heiress. My successor. The one I've been searching for across 6 centuries." The music built to a crescendo, and the lights flickered again. This time they didn't come back on immediately. The ballroom plunged into darkness, and in that darkness, Aurelia heard gasps, heard the rustle of fabric as people turned to look. Then light returned, but not from the chandeliers. From Cyprian. His eyes blazed like twin suns, casting amber shadows across his face, across Aurelia's upturned features. The entire ballroom had gone silent. Even the orchestra had stopped playing. Cyprian released her waist, but kept hold of her hand. He turned to face the crowd, and Aurelia saw them now, really saw them. The two sharp smiles, the eyes that reflected light like animals. The way none of them seemed to breathe in quite the right rhythm. Vampires. All of them. "My kin," Cyprian said, his voice carrying through the silent ballroom like a bell. "My court. Tonight, I present to you Aurelia Vane, daughter of Alara Thorn, bearer of the bloodline, my chosen heiress." A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Aurelia's head spun. Alara Thorn? Her mother's name had been Alara Vane, hadn't it? Cyprian turned back to her, and slowly, so slowly she could have stopped him if she'd wanted, he lowered himself to one knee. The king of vampires, kneeling before her in a ballroom full of his subjects. "I claim you," he said, his amber eyes never leaving hers. "As is my right, as is your birthright. Do you accept?" Aurelia's mouth opened, closed. Her mind screamed that this was impossible, that she should run, that she should. "Aurelia!" The shout came from the edge of the ballroom. "Thaddeus!" He stood there with Margot still clinging to his arm, his face flushed with champagne and rage. "What the hell is this? Some kind of joke? Some pathetic attempt to embarrass me?" Cyprian didn't even look at him. His gaze remained locked on Aurelia, waiting for her answer. But Aurelia looked. She looked at Thaddeus, at his expensive tuxedo and his handsome face and his cruel, stupid eyes. She looked at the man who had spent 3 years making her feel worthless, who had stolen her inheritance and her dignity and very nearly her will to live. And she smiled. "Yes," she said to Cyprian, her voice ringing clear through the silent ballroom. "I accept." Cyprian's answering smile was triumphant and terrible. He rose in one fluid motion, still holding her hand, and turned to face Thaddeus. "You," Cyprian said, and the single word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. "You are the husband." It wasn't a question. Thaddeus paled, but tried to rally. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but Aurelia is my wife. Legally. And I don't appreciate. You appreciate nothing. Cyprian interrupted, his voice soft and deadly. You are a small man with a small mind and a smaller soul. You took something precious and tried to break it. Try to dim its light because you couldn't stand to see it shine. He took a step toward Thaddeus, and Margot actually whimpered, releasing his arm and backing away. The crowd parted like water, giving Cyprian a clear path. His eyes had begun to glow brighter, casting long shadows across the marble floor. But you failed, Cyprian continued, because some things cannot be broken. Some lights cannot be dimmed. And now, little man, you will learn what it means to stand in the presence of true power. Thaddeus tried to speak, but no sound came out. His face had gone from red to white to a sickly gray. Around the ballroom, the other vampires watched with expressions ranging from amusement to anticipation. Cyprian stopped directly in front of him. They were nearly the same height, but Cyprian seemed to tower over Thaddeus, seemed to fill the space around him with something vast and ancient and utterly merciless. Look at me, Cyprian commanded. Thaddeus's head jerked up against his will. His eyes met Cyprian's glowing amber gaze, and Aurelia saw the exact moment her husband's mind broke. Saw his pupils dilate, saw his mouth go slack, saw every ounce of arrogance and cruelty drain from his face like water from a cracked vessel. You will go home, Cyprian said, each word precise and sharp. You will sign whatever papers Aurelia's lawyers present to you. You will give her back everything you stole. Every penny, every property, every piece of her mother's jewelry you pawned for your mistresses. And then you will leave this city. You will never speak her name again. You will never think of her again. She is erased from your mind, from your life, from your very memory. Do you understand? Yes. Thaddeus's voice was hollow, empty, the voice of a puppet with cut strings. Good. Cyprian turned away from him dismissively, and Thaddeus stumbled backward, nearly falling. Margot was already gone, fled into the crowd. Thaddeus followed, moving like a sleepwalker, and Aurelia watched him disappear through the ballroom doors without a single backward glance. 3 years of marriage, gone in less than a minute. She should feel something, triumph, maybe relief. But all she felt was numb, and beneath the numbness, a growing pressure at her chest, in her head, like something trying to break free. Cyprian returned to her side. He took both her hands in his, and his touch was the only thing that felt real. It's time, he said gently. The change has already begun. You felt it when you touched the invitation, when you drank the champagne. Every moment you've been in this house, the blood in your veins has been waking up, remembering what it is. I don't. Aurelia's vision blurred. The ballroom spun. I can't. You can, Cyprian said. He pulled her close, one arm around her waist, supporting her weight as her knees buckled. You're stronger than you know, Aurelia Vane. Stronger than he ever let you believe. And now, you're coming home. The pressure in her chest exploded. Aurelia gasped, and the sound that came out of her mouth was barely human. Her skin felt too tight. Her bones felt like they were reforming. And her eyes, God, her eyes burned like someone had pressed hot coals into her skull. Cyprian lifted her easily, cradling her against his chest. The ballroom was fading now, the vampires' faces blurring into streaks of color and shadow. She heard voices, concerned, excited, reverent, but couldn't make out words. Sleep, Cyprian murmured against her hair. When you wake, everything will be different. Everything will be clear. Aurelia tried to fight it, tried to cling to consciousness, but the darkness was rising like a tide, warm and inexorable. The last thing she saw before it claimed her was Cyprian's face above hers, his amber eyes blazing like twin stars. The last thing she felt was his lips brushing her forehead, cool and gentle. The last thing she heard was his voice, soft as silk and sharp as a blade. Welcome to eternity, my heiress. Then the darkness swallowed her whole, and Aurelia Vane, the poor wife, the charity case, the woman who had been nothing, ceased to exist. Something else was being born in her place. The awakening came in waves. First sound, the whisper of silk against stone, the distant drip of water echoing through vast chambers, the rustle of something alive or undead, moving through corridors she couldn't yet see. Then, sensation. Cool air against her skin, carrying the scent of old roses and older blood. The weight of unfamiliar fabric draped across her body. The hardness of marble beneath her back. Finally, sight. Aurelia opened her eyes to a ceiling painted with stars. Not the crude approximation of constellations she'd known in her marriage bed, but actual luminescence, as if someone had captured fragments of night sky and pressed them into plaster. Each point of light pulsed with its own rhythm, and she could hear them, actually hear them, singing in frequencies that made her teeth ache with pleasure. She sat up slowly. The room around her was circular, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected not her image, but shadows of what she'd been. In one, she saw herself at 17, dirt under her fingernails from her mother's garden. In another, at 23, flinching as Thaddeus raised his hand. In a third, just hours ago, trembling in that ballroom while vampires circled like sharks. But the woman in the center of the room, the woman whose body she now inhabited, bore no resemblance to any of those reflections. Her skin had taken on the luminous quality of moonlight on water. Her hair, once mousy brown, now gleamed like polished mahogany threaded with copper. In her eyes, Aurelia rose and approached the nearest mirror. The glass rippled as she neared it, the old reflection dissolving. What stared back at her now made her breath catch. Her eyes were amber, not the pale yellow of Cyprian's gaze, but deeper, richer, the color of honey held up to firelight. And when she focused, really focused, she could see the pupils contract and expand with predatory precision. The transformation suits you. She spun. Cyprian stood in the doorway, dressed in black velvet that made him look like a piece of the night itself had taken human form. He didn't move, didn't breathe. She realized with a start that she wasn't breathing either, that her chest lay perfectly still, but his presence filled the room like smoke. How long? Her voice came out different, richer. It resonated in her bones. 3 nights. He stepped inside, and the door closed behind him without anyone touching it. The old blood takes time to assert itself. Your mother's lineage was dormant for generations, but it remembers. It always remembers. Aurelia pressed her palm against her sternum, feeling for a heartbeat that no longer existed. I should be terrified, but you're not. No. She met his gaze, and something electric passed between them. I feel like I've been asleep my entire life. Like I'm finally awake. Cyprian's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Then you're ready. For what? To claim what's yours. He led her through corridors that seemed to shift and breathe, past tapestries depicting battles she'd never read about in history books, down staircases that spiraled into depths that shouldn't exist beneath any mortal city. Other vampires passed them, some bowing, others watching with eyes that glittered with calculation or resentment. They emerged into a throne room that made the ballroom look like a child's playhouse. The space soared upward into darkness, its ceiling lost in shadow. Columns of black marble lined the walls, each one carved with names and languages Aurelia somehow understood now. Latin, Greek, Akkadian, tongues that had died millennia before Christ walked the earth. At the far end, 2 thrones sat on a dais of obsidian, and standing before those thrones, arms crossed, expression carved from contempt, was the most beautiful woman Aurelia had ever seen. She had hair like spilled ink and skin like porcelain. Her dress was the color of fresh blood, cut to reveal shoulders that could have been sculpted by Bernini. But it was her eyes that held Aurelia, pale green, cold as winter frost, and filled with an hatred so pure it was almost admirable. So this is the heiress. The woman's voice dripped with disdain. The charity case, the abused wife, the human who needed rescuing. She circled Aurelia like a wolf evaluating prey. Tell me, Cyprian, what exactly makes her worthy of standing beside you? Her pedigree? She didn't even know she had one until you told her. Her power? She's 3 days old. I've walked this earth for 2 centuries. Leocadia. Cyprian's voice held a warning. No. Aurelia surprised herself by speaking. Let her finish. Leocadia's smile was a slash of crimson. Oh, she has a voice. How delightful. She leaned in close enough that Aurelia could smell the blood on her breath. Recent, human, tinged with fear. You think because he turned you, because he whispered pretty words about bloodlines and destiny, that you belong here? You're a pet, darling, a project. And when he tires of you, and he will, you'll be just another portrait gathering dust in the gallery of his mistakes. The words should have stung. A week ago, they would have shattered her. But Aurelia felt something else rising in her chest. Something vast and ancient and utterly unafraid. You're right, she said softly. I was nothing. A woman so broken she couldn't even leave a man who beat her. So worthless she believed every cruel word he spoke. She took a step forward, and Leocadia actually retreated. But that woman died 3 nights ago, and what woke up in her place remembers things she never knew. Remembers a mother who walked away from this world to protect her daughter. Remembers a bloodline that chose mortality over monstrosity. The air in the throne room began to hum. My mother, Aurelia continued, her voice growing stronger, was Ilera Vane, daughter of Cassius Vane, son of Aurelius Vane, who stood at Cyprian's right hand when Rome burned. She gave up immortality because she loved a human man. She chose weakness. She chose death. Aurelia's hands clenched into fists. And every day of my miserable human life, I thought she'd abandoned me, left me to suffer. But she didn't, did she, Cyprian? No. His voice was quiet, reverent. She protected you, hid you, because she knew that if the court discovered you existed, they would use you or destroy you. But I'm not hidden anymore. Aurelia turned to face the assembled vampires who had begun to gather in the shadows, drawn by the confrontation. She could feel them now, feel their hunger and their curiosity and their doubt. I am Aurelia Vane, daughter of Ilera, blood of the first circle, and I am done being afraid. Leocadia laughed, but it sounded forced. Pretty speech. But words don't make you powerful, child. This does. She moved with inhuman speed, her hand shooting out to grab Aurelia's throat. Aurelia caught her wrist mid-strike. The crack of bone echoed through the throne room like a gunshot. Leocadia's scream was music. She wrenched away, cradling her shattered wrist, her face contorted with shock and pain. That's not possible. You're 3 days old. I'm 640 years old, Aurelia said. I just didn't know it yet. She felt it now, the power that had been sleeping in her veins, passed down through generations of veins who had chosen to forget what they were. It sang in her blood like a symphony, each note a memory of battles fought and won, of empires risen and fallen, of nights that stretched into eternity. Leocadia lunged again, all pretense of civility abandoned. But Aurelia was ready. She sidestepped, grabbed the other woman's arm, and used her own momentum to send her crashing into the nearest column. The marble cracked. Leocadia slumped to the floor, blood, black as oil, trickling from her temple. Yield, Aurelia said. Not a request, a command. And Leocadia, 200-year-old vampire, enforcer and schemer and would-be queen, dropped to her knees. The other vampires followed. One by one, they sank down, their heads bowed, their throats exposed in the ultimate gesture of submission. The room thrummed with power. Aurelia's power, raw and new and absolutely undeniable. Only Cyprian remained standing. He crossed the distance between them, his amber eyes blazing with something that made Aurelia's newly still heart ache with phantom sensation. When he reached her, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a brand. My heiress, he murmured. My equal. My queen. And then he knelt too. The weight of it crashed over her. The responsibility, the power, the sheer impossibility of what she'd become. But beneath the fear, beneath the awe, was something else. Something that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering lost. Aurelia looked down at Cyprian, at this ancient king who had seen empires crumble and civilizations rise, and she smiled. Get up, she said softly. We don't kneel to each other. He rose, and when he looked at her, she saw not the predator who had stalked her in that ballroom, but a man, or the memory of one, who had been alone for far too long. What now, she asked. Cyprian's smile was slow, dangerous, full of promise. Now we rule. He led her to the thrones. Aurelia sat, the obsidian cold beneath her, and looked out at the assembled court. They were still kneeling, still waiting for her word. Rise, she said, and her voice carried through the chamber like a bell. They obeyed. Outside, dawn was breaking over the city. Aurelia could feel it, the sun's approach like a distant fire. But here, in the depths of Cyprian's domain, the darkness was absolute, eternal. And for the first time in her life, Aurelia Vane wasn't afraid of the dark. She was the dark, and she was finally gloriously free.